Hey guys, what's going on? I've been really busy during the holidays, so I haven't made a political video in a couple of weeks. Busy with the family and all that, so that's why I've not done anything recently except play some video games, as far as my channel is concerned. But we're going to talk about Jews, and we're going to talk about them getting killed and attacked, and how this all ties into lots of other different subjects. I'm just not just gonna read what happened. That's boring. It's who's doing it, why are they doing it, how does the media report this versus when they report other people getting killed, other demographics. Demographics play into all of this. When Jews are attacked, the media blows it out of proportion. They report on it way more than when other demographics are attacked. Why? Because, first of all, many Jews are in the media, so they play tribalism. They see their own people getting attacked, and of course they bump up that a lot. They report on it 10 times more than when more people are killed from other demographics. They play up the story of anti-Semitism. They constantly want people to see Jews as victims, not as people who commit crimes, people who ruin this country, people, you can't say anything bad about them. Even just me just mentioning that. Here's the amazing thing. Just simply mentioning that there were a high number of Jews in government, in the media, in high places of power in the country, apparently that's just anti-Semitic. But I'm like, well, I'm not judging people based on their race. I'm just looking at the numbers. I'm just reading people's names. It's like saying most people in the NBA are black. Oh, that's racist. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just looking at the demographics. It's like 97% black or whatever it is. I'm not saying anything bad about it. There's nothing wrong with being in a position of power or being in Hollywood or whatever. It's just, I'm just reading it. That's all I'm doing. But apparently that's anti-Semitic. But we're getting off topic here. Let's go into this, shall we? So, this just happened a couple days ago. I believe yesterday. A black man had a machete, went into a rabbi's house and injured 5 people. Now, this is just a latest string of anti-Semitic attacks. I'm not saying that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. I'm not saying that Jews aren't killed because of their religion. Never said that. I don't want people putting words in my mouth. I'm so tired of saying like really basic, straight shit, and then people just completely going off the deep end. What I'm saying is they blow it out of proportion. Black people are killed and stabbed and shot all the time in Chicago by the dozens, by the hundreds. No one ever reports on it, ever. No one gives a shit. It doesn't feed into their narrative. Because it's other black people committing the crime. And they don't want to report on that because that makes black people look bad when you constantly report on all the crimes they do. Same thing with anti-Semitism. They want it to be like a bigger problem than what it is. They want people to pity Jews, to feel bad for them, to make it look like the victim, because victimhood is power in this society. So they constantly blow it out of proportion. This is all over the news. Why is 5 people getting stabbed in a house all over national news for days and days, for these last 2 days? Why? This happens all the time. This happens all the freaking time to other demographics, and it's mentioned like in local news or stuff like that, but it doesn't get nearly the amount of attention. But on how they report it, that's very interesting. This article is actually one of the few honest articles that identifies the attacker as a black male. Lots of other websites don't mention that. Why? Because it makes black people look bad. Okay, so that's the short end of it. And people didn't even talk about that much. The kosher marketplace, I think this was last week, where 3 people were actually killed, not just injured, but killed by another black Israelite. It's interesting. The media is very torn between how to report these things. On the one end, like I said, they want to blow it out of proportion, and they constantly report on every single anti-Semitic thing they can find to try to brainwash people into thinking that it's happening more often than it is. Like, let's say there's 50 anti-Semitic attacks, 150 attacks on white people. I'm just putting out numbers. These aren't actually the numbers of what's happening. But if you report on those 50 attacks like 5 times as much, you can kind of trick people into think that it's not really 50, it's like 300 or 500, because you constantly report on it all the freaking time. You make sure you never miss a single one of those 50, and you go through the media cycle for days and days. On the flip side, the 150 attacks against white people, if you like don't mention like 90% of them, and then the ones you do mention, you kind of like just do it for a couple hours on the local news channel, and then that's it, people think it's actually way less than what it is. They think it's like 20 or 30. And that's how you subconsciously brainwash people into thinking that certain things happen more often than they do, or certain things happen less often than what they do. The same thing they do this with police shootings. Police overwhelmingly kill white people. They kill way more white people than black people. But you would know that if you just looked at the random media news cycle, if you didn't look up the actual stats on who's actually killed by police. If you just go by what NBC and MSNBC and ABC and CNN tell you, you would subconsciously think, hey, I read way more stories about black people getting killed by police than white people, so that must be true. You don't actively think that, but you just subconsciously think this because you see it more often. That's what they do. So on the one side, the media is torn between blowing out anti-Semitism, way worse than what it is, but the flip side, it was a black person who did this. So they're like, oh, should we report on it or not? Because we don't want to make black people look bad. We don't want to admit, okay, here's another point. They constantly say anti-Semitism is on the rise ever since Trump got elected, which makes absolutely no sense. It's completely stupid because, first of all, Trump has plenty of Jewish family members. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish, so how can you be anti-Semitic towards yourself? They never explain that. They never explain how he he constantly bows down to Israel and gives them whatever they want. They did the same thing with Obama. Politicians constantly do that. Constantly do this. If you do like what 99% of what Israel wants, that 1% they will blow that out of proportion and say you hate Jews, you want Israel to die, whatever. Obama gave Israel whatever they wanted and constantly politically protected them and give them billions of dollars in aid and military sales and discounted military sales from like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. All of this shit. He is the only reason why Israel is still standing. If he was actually, a Muslim politician, a Muslim president who hated Israel, Israel wouldn't be there anymore. He constantly did so much shit. Every single president has always done this. Every single president has bowed down to Israel, no matter what they wanted. Ever after Eisenhower, he was the last president to actually stand up to him for anything. But that's beside the point. They constantly say that Trump's rhetoric is what causes the rise in anti-Semitism. In fact, this article, leftists constantly blame Trump for the rise in anti-Semitism. This is just the latest article just from yesterday, but every single time there's an anti-Semitic attack, they say this. Every single time they say Trump causes, Trump rhetoric causes. They blame Trump's rhetoric for everything under the goddamn sun. Remember the El Paso shooter? In his manifesto, he specifically said, I'm not doing this because Donald Trump. And yet they still blamed Donald Trump's rhetoric for the shooting. It's absolutely ridiculous. The thing is, there's so many interconnecting parts to all of this. I know I'm jumping around different topics and stuff, but that's because they're all connected. All of these seemingly not connected things, media, demographics, hate crimes, Israel, whatever, they seem kind of separate until you tie them all together. They blame Trump for the rise in anti-Semitism. How can that be when it's black extremists contributes the most to the rise in anti-Semitism? In fact, people who are not white. We'll get into that article too. Now, this is the main article that brought me to talk about this. It's a very interesting article. Who is behind anti-Semitic attacks in the U.S.? Amid increasing reports of attacks against Jews and the institution in the United States, a crucial question remains unanswered. Who are the perpetrators of these hate crimes, and what can be done to stop them? And he goes through all of these things that have been happening for years now. This is nothing new. Circumstantial evidence suggests that the main perpetrators of anti-Semitic crimes come from two separate sources: right-wing groups such as white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and Muslims and/or Arabs. Unfortunately, little information has been systematically collected on the subject. Why? Why have so little information been collected on this? If this is such a huge problem that the media is talking about it, why aren't they looking at the sources? Who is committing these crimes? If you honestly want to stop anti-Semitism, then why aren't you looking at the source? Because they don't actually care once they find out the answer. It's the same thing when Democrats say they care about, like people in poverty, for example, or black people, and then they create policy that objectively hurt poor people and black people, And they act like they care. No, they don't give a rat's ass about those people. They don't give a rat's ass about anyone but themselves. Well, even then, they even create policies that hurt themselves. Again, we're getting off topic here. So I'm not going to read this entire article because it takes too long. But here is the main point of the article. This is the breakdown with the limited information that they have. The problem is they don't have a lot of information about it. Why? Because they don't want to collect it because they know the answer. This is the breakdown of race, people committing anti-Semitic crimes. Now, at first glance, you say, hey, look, white's the biggest race. You know, they committed 87 compared to black 20, so how can you possibly say that black people are the reason for the rise in anti-Semitism in the last couple of years? Well, look at this number, unknown race. How could you not figure out their race? It's pretty easy. You identified all these other ones. We have breakdowns of ethnicity for everything under the sun. People buying books, buying cars, committing crime, income level, just everything you can possibly think of, every single stat you can think of about anything, we usually have a racial breakdown of it. Why are all these cases we quote unquote can't figure it out? Well, because they know the race. They know it's definitely not white. You know, they love to perpetrate white supremacists as being, you know, when you think anti-Semitism, you think white supremacist. That's what the media is trying to brainwash you into thinking. Well, that's obviously not the case. Look at this. The largest known perpetrator groups was white Americans. That is correct. Never going to deny that. But they only accounted for 14%. So who committed? So how can you say that, you know what, it's anti-Semitism, it has to be white supremacist, it has to be Donald Trump's white supremacist rhetoric, it has to be his followers who are racist and white supremacist neo-Nazis, but they're only 14% of the perpetrators. So we know that's not true. These unknown races are just minorities in general. They're definitely not white, otherwise it would have been counted as white. So the rise in anti-Semitism is due to minorities, not white people. And that's, the media will never admit that in a million thousand years. They will constantly blow up stories of white supremacists attacking Jews, which they do. I'm never going to deny that. These stats are correct. But to assume that is the only demographic that commits anti-Semitism attack, or the biggest demographic, is incorrect. It's only 14%. The rest are minorities of whatever race. Black, Asian, Hawaiian, multi-race, unknown race, Hispanic, non-Hispanic, multiple ethnicities, unknown, all that. White people only commit 14% of anti-Semitic attacks. Minorities commit the rest. So they're the ones. They're the source. But when will you ever hear Anderson Cooper go on CNN and say, minorities, you're the problem? People go in the news media all 24/7 say, white people are the problem, white people are the cause of everything bad in the world, poverty, war, racism, sexism, homophobia, everything under the sun, they blame white people for everything. When will they ever blame minorities for anything? No, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility for your actions, it's all white people's fault. So he will never say that. No one in the news media will ever say that. Many in the media and elsewhere assume anti-Semitic hate crimes are primarily the work of groups variously labeled as white supremacists, white nationals, or alt-right. That may be true, but the evidence for it covers only a small proportion of cases. It is particularly disturbing that anti-Semitism appears to be relatively common in the American Muslim community, including among its leaders. And it goes through all these Muslim leaders who post anti-Semitic things or do anti-Semitic things. It's in common on American college campuses. Even our Representative Keith Ellison has an anti-Semitic history. All these things, blah, blah, blah. When have you ever heard the news media talk about anti-Semitism from the Muslim population? They never do. They will never, ever do that because it makes minorities look bad. And that's not what the news media is about, the mainstream media is about. There's anecdotal evidence that many recent anti-Semitic hate crimes were committed by Muslims or Arabs. A recently published study by the Community Security Service reviewed the 104 serious attacks on Jews and Jewish institutions from 1969 to 2016 and concluded that white supremacist and radical Islamist ideology was a central influencing factor in incidences where motivation can be asserted. And then it goes into all these stories, there is a huge documented history of anti-Semitism from non-white people. When you've ever heard the news media talk about that? They talk about these attacks, don't get me wrong, but in passing. This thing, was just happened last week. It was out of the news cycle like in 2 days once they discovered that the perpetrator was black. In fact, I believe it was this attack that Rashida Tlaib, our amazing representative, one of the squad, one of those nasty women, I believe she's the one who tweeted about this and said, "Here, let me look this up." Well, look at these people. That total white supremacists, right? I mean, that's just hateful white people. Hey, okay, I don't want this thing to play. It's gonna play. No, stop. Okay, anyway. Fuck you. Representative Rashida Tlaib received a flurry of attention on Thursday after she tweeted that white supremacy was behind the Jersey City shooting that left multiple people dead. Well, that's funny because both people who committed it were black. They weren't white. And she's since deleted this tweet. Pretty sure she deleted this tweet, right? Yeah, she deleted the tweet. This is prime example. As soon as they hear anti-Semitism, they jump onto its white supremacy, even though that's incorrect. The shooters were black. It's unclear what prompted Tlaib's error. Oh, we know what prompted her error. Because liberals blame everything bad under the sun on Donald Trump. Apparently Donald Trump is a white supremacist, he's a racist, and his rhetoric is what caused the rise in anti-Semitic crimes. We saw this right here. Every single time this happens, that's what they do. In fact, he condemns it. Isn't that amazing that every single time there's an anti-Semitic attack, okay, it's 14, what are the exact stats? So here's his bombshell. Every time there's an anti-Semitic attack, which 86% of the time is done by a non-white person, he condemns it. Every single time he condemns it. And yet liberals still blame his rhetoric, his white supremacist rhetoric, even though 86% of the time it's a non-white person. Isn't that is clown world. That is hashtag clown world. That is amazing clown world stats right there. 86% of the time it's not a white person, and yet he's the cause for it. This goes into more about the attack in the supermarket that left 3 people dead. The Jersey City murders are the culmination of years of incitement against Jews, but the perpetrators in that case were themselves minorities from the African-American community. The Black Hebrew Israelites, blah, blah, blah. The authorities are now looking into the case as domestic terrorism fueled by anti-Semitism. However, major media has endeavored to dismiss the murders as unimportant and unique. New York Times described the Black Hebrew Israelites as being known for the inflammatory sidewalk ministers who employ provocations of former gospel. Well, it's a bit more than that. In fact, the group in the, I don't even know what that word, Malua, it tends to view religion through a racial lens, such that Jews are described as white and fake, and the real Jews are black. In American society, there is generally one place for one kind of racism. There are far-right white supremacists, and then everyone else. This Mancinian worldview of anti-Semitism and racism means we are only comfortable with one type of perpetrator, an angry white man. Those are the racists. Dylan Roof, the racist who murdered black people in a church in 2015, is the most normal kind of American racist. The El Paso shooter, Tree of Life synagogue attacker, are also the kind of killers that fit to the easy narrative. But when perpetrators stray from that, we have a problem dealing with it. Hence, we don't talk about it. Hence, we don't act like it exists. In New York City, according to a post by journalist Laura Atkins, data shows that out of 69 anti-Jewish crimes in 2018, 40 of the perpetrators were labeled white, 25 were labeled black, and the other were categorized as Hispanic and Asian. So this article is talking about the problem that the media has when dealing with this. It's not a problem. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not stupid. It doesn't fit their narrative. To keep the focus on white supremacists, headlines need to explain that to us that right-wing terrorists have killed more than jihadists, as Slate.com has said earlier this year. Well, they haven't. Even when you start on September 12th, 2001, right-wing terrorists are white. Again, we're 65% of the population. Muslims, I believe, are, how much are they? Populations of Muslim Americans. Uh, 1.1%. What are whites? 65% or whatever they are? Of course, 65% of the population is going to kill more than 1.1%. When you break it down by percentage, No, Muslims kill way more people than white people. But when, again, will you ever hear that by mainstream media? They will never ever say that. If you do per 100,000, or take the fact that there are literally 65 times more white people than Muslims in the U.S., of course white people are going to kill more. But break it by population percentage, per 100,000, wherever you want to do it, then you'll see that Muslims kill way more for their population. Imagine if Muslims are 65% of the population and whites are 1%. Can you imagine just the astronomical more deaths that would happen in the United States? Now I'll end it here with this paragraph. Again, I'll put all of these articles in the description as always, because again, if I read every single one from start to finish, it would take me 2 hours to do all this. So I kind of like jump around and take the big parts of it, but you can read the whole articles for yourself. In the wake of all the attacks in New York City against Jews, culminating in the shooting attack in the kosher market, I think this is written before the stabbing in the house. That's why, no, this is written today, but I can see what he means. Even though the kosher market happened before the stabbing in the house, the fact that 3 people were killed in the market and 5 people were wounded in the house makes sense that that was the culmination. It became difficult to ignore the rising tide, but there is discomfort in looking at the depth of the perpetrators. The comfort society has it with expecting perpetrators to be far right and white, even led, and I talked about Rashida Tlaib blame white supremacy for Jersey attack, her tweets deleted. When it wasn't white supremacy and there was no one to condemn, it didn't fit the narrative, it was less important. And that's the whole point of this rant, is that the media reports on things differently depending on who does the crime and who the demographics of the victim. I've said this many times, this happens all the time. It happens with murder, it happens with mass shooters, happens with every single crime you can think of. They report on things differently. Remember the Covington kids? He smiled at a Native American. That was on the media for literally like 3 weeks straight in January. He's almost, in a couple of days is going to be the 1-year anniversary of that. So a white person smiling at a minority gets 3 weeks worth of 24/7 news coverage. When black people rob and break into people's houses by like the hundreds and thousands in cities across the country, that barely gets mentioned at all. Isn't that amazing?